Now, for more on midterms and the concerns of rural voters, let's bring in Joseph Glauber. He is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Joseph, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sean.
I want to start by looking specifically at rural America and farmers. How have they bounced back from the pandemic, and are they in a better position where they were just a year ago, even though, we just heard from those farmers out there just how dire things are around harvest time?
Yeah, the farmers actually weathered the pandemic pretty well in the sense that one, prices started rising in 2021. That helped a lot. But also remember that the government did provide monies to farmers to help augment some of the losses that they had. So farm income actually was at near record levels, at least nominal levels. And this year will be very similar. The problem is, as the farmer in the report was talking about, they are facing high input costs. And if these prices go down any over the next year or so for output prices, that is, so the price of corn or soybeans, if that starts to decline, then their margins will get much smaller and even negative.
Yeah, I hear what you say is that it's really an industry where all the cost is up front. And we also know that inflation is a big part of the sharp political divide right now. But let's talk about regulation. The Farm Bill is up for reauthorization next year. It is important, and it is also very powerful moving forward. And Republicans are vowing to keep the term climate change out of any new measure.
Yeah, I mean, the Farm Bill is a massive document, and, fully 3/4 of the monies that are in the Farm Bill typically are nutrition programs, so really don't go to farmers, but really go to poor families everywhere. But the farm programs themselves, you're still talking about $20 billion annually. And so you're right. I think a lot of the Republicans in Congress would like to maintain the suite of programs, that being the price and income support programs, the crop insurance programs. And while they're interested in additional programs like what has been proposed by the administration, they don't want that to come out of the existing set of programs. So it's more of a question of where would that money come from, and I think that's where a lot of Republicans are, in Congress at least, are more wary.
Let's pick up on that and talk about, in the 2 years he's been in office, how has the trade policy under the Biden administration affected farmers so far?
Well, I think actually the trade exports have been booming. I think it has less to do with policies by the administration, but the economic climate has been great. Farmers, U.S. has had generally some pretty good crops. They've been price levels have been very high, so export levels are hitting record levels. To a lot of countries, China being a big one. China has regained its role as the #1 export destination. We're going to ship about $36 billion worth of agricultural products to China this fiscal year. And it's likely to continue into next fiscal year as well at the same levels. So that's real important. Now, the Biden administration hasn't done much on trade policy that's very different than the Trump administration. In terms of pursuing free trade agreements or anything like that, what we had seen in prior administrations.
Well, let's talk about former President Donald Trump. What happened to Trump's China deal?
Well, for agriculture, actually, China bought a lot of goods. I would argue that it wasn't necessarily because of the so-called Phase 1 agreement, as it was that China was in the market for a lot of goods. They bought a lot from the U.S., but they also bought a lot from Brazil. They bought a lot from Australia. They bought a lot from almost every other major exporter that supplies goods to China. If you look at the percent year-over-year growth, they're pretty similar elsewhere. But it was a huge boom for U.S. farmers as well. Again, we went from, remember, prior to the Phase 1 agreement with the trade wars, we were down to $9 billion or so exports, and now we're up, closer to 35, 36, 37 billion. So big improvements. And again, that's not just soybeans or corn. It's also animal products and other things.
Yeah, feeding 1.4 billion people, always a challenge. But what could a Republican-controlled Congress mean for farmers in the U.S. Midwest? We are a week out from Election Day. What are the candidates doing in the 11th hour trying to make their pitches to this all-important demographic out there?
Yeah, I think you got to remember that foreign policy, for the most part, is bipartisan. I mean, yes, we've heard that some farmers are opposing the administration's plan, or some in Congress would oppose putting more monies into climate efforts. But generally, the members of Congress, particularly those on the agricultural committees, are very supportive of the programs that are currently in place. I mean, I think the real question is, can you get additional money for farmers? And given the budget environment, I think that's probably doubtful.
Interesting. Well, we certainly appreciate it. Joseph Glauber, the Senior Research Fellow at International Food Policy Research Institute. Thank you so much.
You bet, Sean.